Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 7, Chapter 14, Learning Objective 3. We will look at depressive disorders, the development of depressive disorders, suicide, and bipolar disorders in this learning objective. So let's begin with depressive disorders. Depressive disorders are a type of mood disorder featuring persistent and pervasive feelings of sadness. Over 20% of Americans will experience a mood disorder during their life. Mood disorders are more prevalent in females, and they're most likely to develop during the during the 30s. They're less common in elderly adults than in younger adults. And there are two types of depressive disorders that we will look at, shown here in this chart from page 562. I'll cover these on the next slide. First of all, major depressive disorder is a mood disorder characterized by extremely depressed moods or loss of interest in normally pleasurable activities that persists for 2 weeks or more. Average episodes last between 6 months to a year. Other common symptoms are feeling blue or irritable, sleeping difficulties, and that they can go either way. Sleeping, more than normal or having difficulty sleeping. Fatigue and loss of energy, weight changes, and that can go either way as well. Some people gain weight when depressed, some people lose weight. Thoughts of death or suicide, known as suicide ideation, means that you're thinking about it. Major depressive disorder affects about 7 to 8% of Americans in any given year. Approximately 16% of Americans will experience major depression at some point in their lives. Then we have the second disorder, persistent depressive disorder. It's a mood disorder characterized by mildly or moderately depressed moods that persist for at least 2 years. Typical duration for somebody that has persistent depressive disorder is about 5 to 10 years at a time. People with persistent depressive disorder, which is approximately 2 to 3% of the population, may have many of the same symptoms as those with major depression, but the symptoms are less intense. So this graph provides a general way to understand the two main types of depressive disorders in relation to normal mood, shown in the center there. People with major depressive disorder tend to experience extremely depressed moods for at least 2 weeks, but often for months or longer. By contrast, people with persistent depressive disorder experience more mild or moderate depressive moods, but for many years. So persistent depressive disorder is longer lasting. Major depressive disorder is a deeper depression. On here. So in a couple of, for one example, in 2020, in an interview, singer and actor Lady Gaga acknowledged that she suffered from depression. She told People magazine, "I used to wake up in the morning and I would realize that I was Lady Gaga. Then I became very depressed and sad, and I didn't want to be myself." And then on the right here, we see an advertisement from the National Institute of Mental Health. And it's intended to increase understanding about psychological disorders, because the more that people hear about how common psychological disorders are, the more inclined that they are to visit a doctor when problems arise. And this is why some of the things that we've looked at, like Kevin Love, coming out about his panic disorder, and Howie Mandel about his OCD, and Lady Gaga about her depression. These are important stories when people share their mental health issues. It's that once again you normalize them a little bit. Like, these are common. Lots of people have them, and there's things that you can do about them. And the same as this advertisement here. It's important that people realize, not to ignore their symptoms, but to seek treatment when they feel like they might have some kind of, mental disorder. Causes of mood disorders are complex interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors. Let's start with biological factors here. Um, Studies of twins, of families, and of adopted children support the notion that depression has a genetic component, which tends to affect various neurotransmitters in the brain, those that are responsible for regulating emotions. So, due to having certain genes, it can cause neurotransmitter level irregularities, which can, of those that regulate emotions, which can cause the mood disorder. Studies of brain function have suggested that certain neural structures may be involved in mood disorders. So, for example, they've looked at people that have had damage, that have experienced brain damage, and if there's damage to the left prefrontal cortex, it can lead to depression, but damage to the right prefrontal cortex does not. So, this tells us that, there's something, there's a part of the left prefrontal cortex that is involved in mood disorders. There are also psychological factors in depressive disorders. I'll start with the second theory shown on the slide here. Martin Seligman, and you should know his name. Seligman is Seligman, Seligman. Anyways, Martin Seligman, he proposed a theory based on learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the tendency to feel helpless in the face of events that we believe that we can't control. So it often arises after repeated failures. So maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody's been looking for a job for a while. They're kind of down and out. They want to get a job, and they've sent out so many resumes and applied to a lot of jobs, and they've had interviews, and none of them have turned out. I mean, with a whole string of failures where it seems like nothing's working, like there's just no way. Like, sometimes learned helplessness can set in, and when that happens, the person or the animal, this happens with animals as well, they give up basically, and they stop trying, even when new opportunities arise. So once you reach a state of learned helplessness, I mean, that person looking for a job, like maybe the perfect job for them becomes available, but they don't even send a resume in, or they don't even go for an interview because they've reached a point of believing that nothing can work. There's no sense in even trying. And with the research that Martin Seligman did, he showed learned helplessness in dogs. He did a study where he had a room that they would have a dog in, and there was a barrier in the center of the room, and it's possible for the dog to jump over the barrier. And so there's two sides of the room, and what they would do is they would shock the floor, and a typical dog, they always jump over the barrier to get to the other side, and where the floor isn't being shocked, and so a normal dog will jump over the barrier every time they feel a shock, and they will reach the side that doesn't have a shock. And what they did though with some dogs is that they prevented them jumping over the barrier, so there was no escape from the side of the room that was being shocked, and so they had to endure the shock. And then After a while, they opened up the barrier to these dogs so that, like a normal dog, they could jump over when they get shot, but they didn't. When they got shot, they just laid there and took it, and they didn't try. They had given up even trying to do something to escape, even though now it was possible, but they had learned earlier that nothing they did mattered. So even when it was, they could escape, they didn't. And that's, and so he Seligman first did this, this pretty famous experiment with these dogs and demonstrated this concept to learn helplessness. And it works basically the same in humans. Like, you try a bunch of times and nothing works, and then you kind of give up and you don't even try anymore, even though there might be a way out for you, even though there's a solution to whatever problem is that you've given up on. Okay, so that's learned helplessness, and people in that state, will tend to be depressed. Like I said, they kind of have just given up and stopped trying. Um, in the first theory shown on the screen here, Aaron Beck he's famous for doing a lot of research on depression, and he's hypothesized the psychological factor associated with depression is how people think of themselves. From Beck's perspective, people likely to develop depression blame misfortunes on personal defects, and they see positive occurrences as a result of luck. Beck talks about the cognitive triad, which is shown here. This is Aaron Beck's cognitive triad. According to Beck, people who experience depression perceive themselves, their situations, and the future negatively. So, for the self, they might have thoughts like they're worthless, or that I'm worthless, or I'm a failure, or I am ugly, and so they have negative thoughts about who they are as a person. They tend to have negative thoughts about their situation. So maybe something like everybody hates me, or the world is unfair, and they have negative thoughts about the future. Things are hopeless. There's nothing I can do to change my situation. I can't change. And this is what a lot of his research showed, is that people that suffered from severe depression often had this cognitive triad. They had these negative thoughts about who they were, about their situation in life, and about their futures. And these negative thoughts are going to keep creating and maintaining the depression over time. And okay. Um, there are also social factors in depressive disorders across multiple countries and contexts. Twice as many women as men are diagnosed with depression. One theory is that women respond to stressful events by internalizing their feelings, which leads to depression and anxiety, whereas men externalize their feelings with alcohol, drugs, and violence. I mean, this externalizing approach of men can certainly lead to other problems, but it does make depression less likely compared to the internalizing approach that's more associated with women. So women tend to, kind of think of, they engage in thinking about their negative issues or problems or a stressful event, you know, thinking about it over and over, which can spiral down into a depression. Whereas men go out and get drunk or do drugs or break something or hurt somebody or whatever, which once again, these are not good behaviors and they can lead to other problems, but it does, it is less likely to lead to depression. Okay. Um, as of 2018, suicide is the second leading cause of death among Americans 10 to 34 years of age. Deaths by suicide have been increasing, in particular for emerging adults over the past 20 years. Emerging adults are the 18 to 25-year-old range. U.S. men were 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women were. And people desire death when two fundamental needs are frustrated, according to Thomas Joyner. the need to belong or to feel connected with others, and the need for competence. And Joyner believes that that these are essential needs, in life, to feel like you are connected to other people, and that you're competent. Okay. What should you do if you think a friend or a loved one might be considering suicide? First of all, certainly take all threats of suicide seriously, and don't be afraid to ask a person directly, like, are you having thoughts of hurting or killing yourself? It's Asking about suicide will not put the idea in the head. And so you don't have to worry about, like, if that it would be wrong to ask. There's nothing wrong with directly asking. It can open the door for a person to express their feelings, and if they're like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. Like big deal. You might be slightly embarrassed for a second, but it's not going to be a huge deal. It's better to ask. If somebody has said something, that makes you think that they might be thinking of suicide, like, it's best just to directly ask. And it's um and and it's not, once again, it's not dangerous to ask. It will often, like I said, it often open the door where they'll be like, yeah, this is the way I've been feeling, and it really can, the question can get somebody talking. Get help, certainly, and one way is through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Um, it's a national network of local crisis centers that provide free and confidential emotional support to people in suicidal crisis or emotional distress. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they made it easier as of July 2022, so just over a year ago. It can be reached by dialing the 3-digit number 988. And many people still aren't aware of this. So 988, or if you're anywhere in the States, you can reach the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I say get help. Like, it can, if it's a friend that you're worried about, or a loved one that you're worried about, that maybe has said something, or have talked about killing themselves. I mean, you can call on their behalf. Like, you can ask for help. What should I say? What should I do? And if you call, like, you might be able to get them to talk to somebody. Like, so, you don't have to. It's not wrong to call because you're worried about somebody else. I mean, they will have, very experienced people that will help you, to help somebody else. And finally, let the person know you care, which involves, listening to them, um, and letting them know that they've been heard. So, like, listen closely to what they're saying, and don't, you can repeat things back. Oh, it sounds like you're feeling this way. Like, just often, like, it's a, it can be maybe it sounds like too simple or straightforward, like just to repeat things back, but it 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 lets a person know that you understood them, and it's good to change a word or two at least, but you don't have to analyze or anything. Like, so somebody's been saying, oh, this has happened, this happened, this happened, like, and so you might repeat back. Sounds like you've had a lot of stressful experiences, or it sounds like you've had a lot of things going wrong, like, and so and these kind of statements just make a person feel like somebody's listening to them. Um, and if you can't think of the thing to say, like, just even repeat back almost word for word what they said. I mean, like, you um, tell them that they're not alone, and that you and that there's others that care for them, and that you and others will support them. Once again, it's sometimes people just need to feel like they are connected to somebody else, and somebody else cares, and is going to help and wants to help them. And that could be enough to kind of start the ball rolling in a positive direction. And by the way, going back to the get help, one of the other things I was going to mention was, like, if you know that there's somebody that's, like, that certainly closer to this person than you are, like maybe a family member, or like if they're really close to their parents or something, like getting help might be contacting the parents, or getting help might be contacting the person that you know is their best friend. Like maybe you're just maybe you're just a part-time friend or something like. But if you know that there's somebody that's really close to them, get that person involved. Try to get that person to come talk to them, because we really want, if we're when we're in that kind of if somebody's in that kind of deep pit, they really want somebody somebody that they're close to kind of reach out to help them. Um, that's go on. Going on to bipolar disorders. As I said, bipolar disorders involve mania. We'll start with a case study. Singer Mariah Carey, once again, just another famous person that came out and talked about one of their disorders. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at the age of 31. She made her diagnosis public in the hope of reducing the stigma associated with psychological disorders. I think it's really good when these people, when famous people do step forward and share these stories. It does get more people, you know, to seek help. They think, oh, if you really admire somebody that's famous, and they come out and say, yeah, I've I've gotten help for my disorder. And if you have something similar, you're going to feel like, well, I can do that too. I can get help. Let's look at two different types of bipolar disorders, and we can use this graph here to kind of take a look at the difference. So people with bipolar 1, they tend to experience extremely elevated moods. You can see that green line going way up. So going upwards is experiencing mania, which is an elevated mood. They may also experience major depressive disorders as well. You can see the dotted green line going under normal mood, but that's not required for diagnosis of bipolar 1. So with bipolar 1, you get really high mania, elevated moods. And by the way, these high elevated moods, it's not a good thing. You may think, what's wrong with having an elevated mood? I mean, like, when you experience extreme mania, people will like act crazy in these states. They might spend their whole life savings on some crazy idea. I read a story. I remember reading a story about a dentist. He was in a manic state. He had thoughts that he was such a great dentist that he needed to expand his practice. And rather than going through any of the normal steps to expand your business, he had a sledgehammer and just started banging walls down in his office because he needed more space. And it cost him a ton of money because he damaged so much. But this was his thought while he was manic. He needed more space, so he just started sledgehammering walls. And I had a student once many years ago, one of my classes, and she talked about some of her experiences and about how much she would max out credit cards when she was in a manic state, just on crazy schemes. And so you're not thinking clearly when you're in a manic state, even though at the time it feels great, and it does. I mean, I've experienced some mania in my life. I won't really get into. I don't have bipolar, but anyways, I know what the feeling is, and it is it can feel really great at the time, but once your thoughts are not normalized, and you do tend to do crazy things, and person can be dangerous, certainly when they're manic. So with the mania, with bipolar 1, lots of high mania episodes, and maybe some depression, and maybe, or yes or no, like they could or could not have it. So with bipolar 2, you can see the red line that they experience mildly elevated moods known as hypomania. So it's kind of like, somewhat manic, not as high as bipolar 1. And they do get, major depressive disorder. So they're kind of like, they for a lot of their time, they're like somebody with major depression, but then they also rise to these manic states where they will tend to feel like they can, I haven't gotten anything done while I was depressed, and all of a sudden they'll be very active and getting stuff done. And the hypomania isn't quite as, as severe or as dangerous. And a lot of these people with bipolar 2, I mean, it is the time where they try to get as much done as they can before they go back into depression. Okay, so the two types of bipolar disorder are summarized in this table on page 567. Once again, I don't go through these charts. You can read them on your own. But, as far as development of bipolar disorders, they are, first of all, they're much less common than depression. Around 3 to 4% of the population will experience a bipolar disorder in their lifetime. If you remember with depression, it was sorry, I'm just looking back, 16%, I believe, for lifetime prevalence. Yeah, 16% would experience major depression during their life. So this is about a quarter of that, as many people, 3 to 4%. Bipolar disorders are equally prevalent in women and men. They emerge most commonly during late adolescence or early adulthood. And there is a very strong genetic component to bipolar disorders. This was revealed in twin studies and also in a genetic study of an Amish community. And it was, it was kind of a case study of a specialized population, and they found, a lot of bipolar, that bipolar tended to run among genetically related people. Genetic research also suggests, however, that the hereditary nature of bipolar disorders is complex and it's not linked to only one gene. Current research is trying to identify the genes that may be involved. When bipolar disorder does run in families, in later generations, it tends to be more severe and it tends to appear at younger ages. So it can worsen from generation to generation. And that will conclude learning objective 3.